Hey guys, Luton here, back with another episode of Below the Line. This is a series where I look at your comments and respond to them. I guess first question, how often would you like to see this series? I've been doing it kind of monthly, but perhaps we could go weekly or even bi-weekly, so tell me down below what you think about that. Today I'm going through the comments from the recent Hell Let Loose videos that I've been doing, so let's have a look in. First up, Kill for Money. Hopefully roads give some sort of movement speed boost to both infantry and vehicles to offer some sort of risk-reward style of gameplay. This way roads are more exposed and more prone to ambushes and mines, but they can offer you a faster method to where you need to get to. Obviously, going through foliage can be slower, but a more safe method. I actually really like that. That's a really good idea. Is it going to be possible in the game? I have no idea. But that is a pretty good idea, and it makes a lot of sense if you think about it. And very often in these games, there is kind of no speed. I guess there's sort of no speed penalty or benefit to being on roads or grass or rough terrain in these kind of games. And actually, that would be a giant change up to not only the way, look at this right now. See, right now they're just breezing through it like it's not even there. You could probably imagine sort of grass, medium rough terrain, that there's a very light penalty that you barely notice, but then this sort of more staunch mud that you have to kind of slop through, or kind of like destroyed terrain where you need to be careful, ruined buildings, or like you say, trying to break through a hedge line, maybe that actually does give you a bigger penalty. Barbed wire like this should be completely impassable. So those would make some really interesting decisions. I mean, look, I don't think this is going to be in the game, but imagine if you even went further. Imagine if you had a game that was like, you know, an open FPS like this, and once you start bringing vehicles in, driving across fields and so on, it makes certain areas more difficult for infantry to pass through if the ground has been like churned up or whatever. But anyway, look, in a basic level, if they did something like, say, okay, if a unit is moving across something which is not a road, it receives like a 0.5 or, you know, 1% sort of, you know, speed penalty or something along these lines, you know, maybe there would be something there, or, you know, I say 1%, 10%, whatever, you know, it needs to make some kind of noticeable change up. But that would be a really big factor in considering where to move yourself around the map. So I like that idea a lot. Tell me what you think about that one, guys. Okay, next up, eBunny. He's a long time viewer of the channel. It says, this is looking good. Even while just watching this video, I'm liking the atmosphere, the feeling that it conveys, and I agree. I think that's a really good thing with Hell Let Loose. Of course, it's always a question of whether that feeling is going to be a novelty thing, and whether after a while that's going to dissipate and you're left with a game that might not actually be that enjoyable in the long term. And that's very true. That's often a fact, and we've seen that with many other FPS. But that's something we're going to have to figure out as we go. Definitely sounds promising. He says, I'm an Overwatch player, haven't really been playing any other shooters for a while, and the game has suffered quite a lot this past year from toxicity, and I think this is something we see across the internet now. People are just getting sick of it. It's like, yeah, we fucking get it. Some of you out there like to piss people off. Now just fuck off. You know, it's like, I think people have had enough of it. It says, I feel like the game could really use some community-run servers, not just temporary lobbies that players can create, to let people build their own communities, maybe even form teams, clans, or guilds in-game. That way, those who are looking for more constructive gameplay with like-minded players could get it without having to set up or look for scrims or other types of organized play outside the game. Now, I pretty much predicted this last year. I said in 2017, I would probably not be playing in many public games. Now, PUBG is the exception to the rule there, but it's because in PUBG, you don't really need to have the same kind of, like, large-scale coordinated team play that players look for in most sort of tactical FPS games. In PUBG, you can kind of just run around and blow people away. But it's the kind of the constant, like, burning on other people, the constant sort of slandering of other people, and the constant trolling of other people, and just fucking around. Like, you know, you end up with some players on your team who are just not doing anything, and you're just like, oh, for Christ's sake. You know, this is why through, I would say, most of Battlefield, I ended up sort of creating my own server, running my own server. It was the only way you could get constructive gameplay. And we're not talking Battlefield 1 or Hardline here, we're talking Battlefield 3, Battlefield 4. You know, back then, people forget, you know, it really was even back then. But let's go into another comment which kind of actually ties into this. So I'll bring in LB's comment here, who says he was a bit underwhelmed by the gameplay trailer, expected more movement and a slightly faster pace in general. I'm curious why you thought it was going to be faster pace, and I actually don't think that I would like to see that. He says also thought the team play aspects would be emphasized by gameplay directly and not just fake comms between players, which is why I love BF in the first place. You didn't need fancy military coordination to do anything, it just naturally happened because of the in-game mechanics. The whole video feels just too similar to Squad for me, so I'm not sure what to think of it anymore. So LB kind of alluding a little bit to what eBunny was saying in his previous comment there about kind of the teamwork aspect and getting people together, and it's kind of interesting you sort of say about the way in which gameplay should work in relation to maybe something like Battlefield in terms of the mechanics lead you. Now, I do find that is a point of discussion, a point of contention, because other producers that I know also stand along this line where it's more that the players shouldn't make things happen. The game mechanics should essentially pigeonhole you into a certain type of play. So in essence, if the game allows it, you should do it. If the game doesn't allow it, then you don't do that. So essentially the mechanics lead the gameplay style. So the mechanics lead the pace, the mechanics lead how objective players play by giving you benefits or negatives, or they just inherently, make players sort of almost subconsciously lean towards a certain way of playing. So essentially the game's design dictates the way in which players play, rather than the game being almost like a kind of a foundation base and then players on top of that interpreting. Now, I am not so much of the opinion, but I can basically, if the game mechanics lead you in a certain way, then that's the easiest and best solution. Because if the game mechanics lead you in a certain way, it's quite straightforward, there's nothing too complicated there, you just jump in, you play the game, there's nothing else that has to be done, there's no time to be put into it. However, Battlefield, even 3 and 4, were a pretty good example of games where the mechanics kind of lead you and that's all there is to it. But even with that said, you would just find round to round to round to round to round of steamroll or being steamrolled, I mean, just how common was. That's why I had a server in Battlefield, because I was sick to death of playing like 90% of my games where it was either steamrolling or being steamrolled. Neither of those situations are fun, okay? Steamrolling is not fun because you're just running through, that round is over. There's nothing fun or good about that. Being steamrolled, it sucks because every time you get up, you're down, and you just can't get anywhere. And that's why, look, I know people don't like it because it's a pain in the ass and it's time consuming to do it, but setting up a community, running servers, and properly moderating and managing those servers is the only way to get good gameplay now. Through the fact that the player base for a lot of games has just grown sort of exponentially on like a global scale. There's so many people playing now, and that unfortunately, where gaming used to be quite a niche-ish thing, it now is not. Now look, I'm not saying that's a bad thing. All I'm saying is there are a lot of players out there who don't have as much long-term experience as others. That is changing. It is changing over time. But even then, you just have a big mix of people whose agendas and objectives and what they want to get out of the game that they're playing are very, very mixed and very, very different. And so it's not even a question of skill anymore. It's a question more of what do people want in that game? What do people want to get out of that game? Some people want to play really tactically. Some people just want to jump on for like half an hour, play around, they don't care, then they jump out. Some people are just there to dick around and screw, some people are going to be there to just play with friends and they just want to play with their friends and then that's all they want to do. They don't want to meet other people. They don't want to play with other people. They want to just play with their friends. So you've got like, and there's probably other stuff in there. Drop me some examples you can think of with this, but it's just like it's a big mixing pot of people with different agendas, and so it's very difficult to kind of like coordinate and group that together. And it doesn't even matter whether the game's mechanics lead, because the player's own objective to a point is going to dictate like how they play. So creating a community and saying like, hey guys, I'm going to create a community, I'm going to create a server, I'm going to create a bunch of people, and what we want is strong tactical gameplay. We want people that are going to get in the mix who don't care if they get killed that often. They want to throw themselves into those objectives. They want to create exciting, fast, pushing, aggressive gameplay. We want to have real battles. We want to have that kind of gameplay. Creating those kind of communities is sort of what I've always tried to do. I've always tried to sort of get, because that's what I find most exciting in these games. Now look, if you don't want that, no worries. Go do whatever you want to do. You want to fuck around and jump off buildings? Go do that. You want to just sit there and rack up kills? Go do that. Just don't do it here. Don't do it on my time. Do you know what I mean? It's like, I know what I want to do. Go do whatever you like. Go do whatever you like. I'm going to do this. And that's where I'm at with this. Okay, next comment, and it's a Lowen. Odin says, Luton, I personally have always hoped for a World War II game that really brings the feel of Band of Brothers. This game looks like it's trying for a similar combat style, but seems to be missing a big part. First, I'd love to see somebody testing a World War II game where players can only communicate in voice proximity, except for the radio operator. However, each squad per se would get a runner. Essentially, that would be one man in charge of keeping the squad informed of the lieutenant's orders, as well as being the key to communicating with other squads on the battlefield. Basically, each squad would have two men who have one shared goal communication. Now, of course, I do see the downsides of this. First of all, it means it's nearly impossible to be able to implement a system like this without huge gaps of communication due to unreliable players. Second, if you're a commander and you need to send a quick message to a nearby squad, you can just as easily run over there yourself to tell them. Finally, many people could see it as a nuisance, yes, and make them lose unit cohesion, lone wolfing. Any thoughts? Yeah, a lot of issues with this. It's one of those things that's a nice thought, but in reality would just not work in any way. I'll try and make this one a quick sort of breakdown on this, but essentially it wouldn't happen because, think about it, right? If you don't have someone taking that role, you're screwed. If you have someone taking that role who isn't very good at it, you're screwed. It impacts on the gameplay way too much. If you want to play something and build that into it, just go play Arma, get the World War II mods for Arma, find a bunch of people who want to do it, and make it happen there. But trying to do this in any kind of game, which is a public thing, and relying on someone who is just going to be on for communication, I mean, it's like, I would imagine half the time that person wouldn't be aware that they had to do that. They wouldn't have the ability to do it, and they probably wouldn't, it would be so confusing. It would, you would essentially just not have any communication. It just wouldn't work. It wouldn't work in any shape or form. So it's a nice idea, and I can understand the kind of wanting to simulate the realism and wanting to kind of have those elements in there. But like I say, in a kind of public set game, no way in hell that will work. Just no way. But if you wanted to have something like that, the best option that you're going to have is play Arma 3 with World War II mods, find a bunch of people, make it work that way. Okay, last one then from Eric Sword. It says, server browser would be great. We had a great community in Battlefield 2142, Bad Community 2, Battlefield 3, with Battlefield Gotland, where we had control over our own servers and would make sure that the gameplay was the way players liked it. When that ability went away, the community dissolved and loads of players left Battlefield since the gameplay was not what they wanted anymore. Now, the reason I bring this in is because 2 points. One, I find it an interesting thought that what I was talking about earlier with the idea that, you create communities and so on and so on. But if the game itself, in terms of the mechanics, so going back to what we were talking about before with the mechanics leading the gameplay, this is almost kind of counter my own point, really. So it's like if you end up making the game all about communities and, focusing on that aspect of it too much, and the gameplay mechanics itself don't just allow the game to play, then as soon as those communities decide to move on to something else, bam, the game dies. Because people will jump in, it'll be a shitty experience, they maybe won't be able to find enough people to play with, and they'll just leave, they won't come back, And if there isn't a community there or some kind of element that people can hook up and get into, then it's just going to die on its arse, yeah? So that's an interesting thing. The other interesting thing is that, on the other side of things, I think people have been getting sick to death of the kind of quick play focus that a lot of games are going. Again, I'm just going to come back, like Battlefield, but other stuff as well. It's just a good example. Where you have, like I say, this kind of quick play emphasis, and the devs kind of push that quick play emphasis, so taking away server browser. You could see how frustrated people got when they sort of didn't have server browser. Another example, something like Operations in Battlefield. Operations was pretty much, for me, the standout thing about Battlefield 1. Operations was a really good game mode, apart from the fact that it had absolutely dumbass behemoths that would come in and just fuck it up. But if you took them out of it, it would be a good game mode, but it doesn't. It has them in, so it's fucking stupid. But if you didn't have those in there, it would be a really good game mode. And the thing is they wouldn't add it to a server browser. Now, I don't know if there was some mechanical reason why that was not possible, but it was super irritating because it meant you constantly had to join via the stupid quick play. You'd have to join in, you find like your team's half empty and you go, oh, bollocks to it. Stepping away from that kind of quick play mentality means that you are sort of leaning towards more creating groups, creating communities. And I think that devs, because they understand that the communities now are not so like tight knit, they're not so niche based. It's not to say it doesn't exist at all. Of course it does exist, I'm sure. But what I'm saying is on the whole, as a generalization, you're going to see a lot more just random players now, and the devs are just like, okay, so this is where it's at, so we're going to lean more in that direction. So they're leaning more towards catering just for the masses rather than catering for the core of whatever game support that it has. Ultimately, I think that's a bad thing, and ultimately I think that's why you see companies like EA and DICE, I think over time, start to make some changes and realize like, hey, this may have worked in an instance, but it's not where we actually need to go. Thanks for watching as always, guys. Drop me your thoughts about these topics down below in the comments, and I'll have another Below the Line coming up really soon. Again, interested to know how often you think I should do these, how watchable they are, if you think they're watchable, guys. And also, it doesn't have to always be like a Below the Line topic. in terms of just from YouTube content. We could even start doing this series as like an ongoing thing where perhaps I use Discord, or I put sort of a Twitter question out and then you guys respond on Twitter and then I respond to those questions. So if you guys think this is just an interesting series for discussing industry game topics, this could actually roll out into a whole other thing, I think, where, you know, maybe I post questions about different, you know, questions of the day, topics of the day. You guys weigh in with your opinions. So that could be an interesting direction to take this in. If you think that's a good idea as well about that, please drop that down below as well. Thanks for watching, guys. See you next time.